Yes.
I want to ask you some about the idea of taking over old institutions. What are some of your thoughts about what to do to handle massive government repression? You know, like you mentioned the IWW earlier. Well, the IWW was really strong in the first years, and then at some point, the government repression became so huge, they had to devote a lot of their resources to fighting legal battles and showing jail solidarity, and there was a lot less direct organizing that was able to happen. Eventually, they diminished, you know, in advance of the general diminishment of the labor movement. So, and also sort of related to that, they were probably the most militant, widespread labor organization in the United States at the time. So, I mean, how do you counter the immense strength of the state and capitalism?
John's a member of that, though, too.
Technically not anymore, but I was an organizer in New York City with the IWW, and we actually did union organizing. We did from scratch, started an undocumented, basically warehouse workers union, and organized 10 plants, about 150 workers. But in the end, they all got fired, and we would win legal cases, but because they have no rights when it comes to citizenship, they couldn't get the jobs back. So, but interesting story. But I was a member, and their history is we have to learn from it. Repression, though, I give you some idea. Like, of course, we don't have all the answers. We'll have to see how it plays out. But I have some ideas on how to be able to battle some of that. One is something that we call the dilemma situation. You have to create a dilemma situation, which means that one or two things can happen in a particular political moment. Say, workers are on strike, and there's two things that can happen. We go on strike, and maybe say, like, we occupy the factory, something where the state doesn't do anything, and we win our demand because they're not repressing us and not doing anything, and we have the power to win our demand. So we won. The other thing is they repress us, and because we have popular support, it means that our movement's going to grow because of that. So either way, we win. And I know it's hard. That's kind of more down the road because we don't have that popular support. So I'll maybe address some of the near-term stuff. But we can imagine, look at historical examples when, we're not going to be able to take on the government with guns. They have Delta Force, and beyond that, they have Delta Capital Force. I don't know, which are probably all the fraternities that joined the military. No, and so, like, we're not going to do that. What we're going to have to do is, like the Vietnam insurance, is organize the military. We need people who are who are not going to shoot at their brothers and sisters, literally brothers and sisters or neighbors, because they realize, who am I fighting for? So we really, and that's where the issue of violence or nonviolence, I know you didn't bring this up, but is really kind of moot. Of course there's going to be violence, it's a violent system. But what our strategy is we focus on is building popular power and be able to battle that and be able to combat it. Right now, it's a tough situation. They can do what they want. We have to build institutions that can be able to combat them, and we have to go out and organize as much as we can. But until then, they will try to take us out. They have tried to do it, especially in the Northwest around environmental stuff and the PMR stuff. And one other thing, like Casey going on this, is we have to pick our battles and not necessarily do something that might risk repression just because we think it's right, but it might not be strategic. So in the sense where we want to occupy something, but we know that we don't maybe have the popular support of a base, like a school occupation. There's a group of us that want to go and occupy a building because there's something bad going on, tuition increases. But we know that point we haven't done the organizing enough to get a base that supports something like that. What's going to happen? The occupation is going to last, we're going to get dragged out. Then we're going to be having fundraisers to get people out of jail, and it's actually diverting resources from organizing. And I would argue this happened in New York City one time, recently, at New School. And so you have the fundraisers coming to get prisoner support for the bail, support for this. I'm like, okay, of course I'm going to go support it. But why are we doing fundraisers for something that we should have not done in the first place? We should have that money to come and to fundraiser to fund the new domestic workers union, and then go on. Of course, we can't always. The state's going to do what it wants, but we can be a little more strategic in going around and how we're going to engage with it. Of course, we get dragged out, then we decry how bad the state is. Well, of course it's bad. What do you think the fuck is going to happen? You're occupying a building that's controlled within capitalism in a strong state. They're going to drag you out by your feet. So you have to go and yeah. So that's basically that. So we have to kind of be a little more strategic about picking our battles. That's kind of what I would say on it. But it's a tough question. We have to be able to deal with it. And no, Peter's going to be talking on repression tomorrow. So right.
Yeah, I mean.
Maybe I'll talk to you after.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would just reaffirm that the creation of a dilemma situation really is the key, and that in the case of specific organizations facing strong oppression and not being able to continue their work as a result of that oppression, I imagine the answer to that is through a truly popular movement in which the various struggles are linked. That you have organizers within struggles in various spheres of society that understand that if our labor movement is being crushed right now, that we need popular support from the other movements to back it up. That we can't let that flounder and let the labors and let the economic sphere be lost essentially to our revolution, and that all the rest of the movements would support it because they understand that it has this holistic connection.
Well, we'll take it.
So I understand that one or both of you are involved in Palestine solidarity work, and I'm interested in what that looks like in New York, where you're from, and how that ties into what you're talking about.
Sure. So there's a few groups at BARD.
Which made me stress that Bard is not New York City.
That's right. BARD is not in New York City. I should have mentioned that. BARD is actually in the Hudson Valley, which is north of New York, and it's a very isolated space, not really near an urban area. It's about an hour from New York, which can be an interesting thing. It can either, everyone's so stir crazy they feel like they have to do something, or they're all just in the woods doing nothing. So you can go either way. But at BARD, there's a couple of different organizations that work around Palestinian solidarity, and it can come out in a couple of ways. There's one organization that's particularly focused on education on campus and bringing speakers to talk about the various issues surrounding what's going on in Palestine. And one of the things that we've struggled to do on campus is to link that particular struggle, and this is something that I think often occurs on campus and within the student movement, is that unintentionally it becomes sort of fragmented. Like everyone would go to each other's events, right, from different groups. But there's very little discussion of how they relate to one another and how your various movements can actually help inform and empower one another. And so that's something that has been a struggle that we've been trying to do, is to cast that particular issue in light of various other issues, whether it's a general anti-imperialist struggle or talking about anti-racism issues in relation to that particular struggle. And that's something that I think is informed by a holistic analysis, and that says that in order for all of our movements to gain the strength that we need them, that we want them to, that they need to, that we need to be working in coordination with other movements.
Are you guys doing BDS work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, the political...
Boycott, divestment, and sanction.
Yeah, I mean, BARD is not... It's an interesting political environment, and certainly that's on the table. That's something that we call for. But there's also, for instance, there's an organization on campus that is led by a Palestinian student, and he is extremely active, does extremely good work back in Palestine. He organized this project that takes students from BARD to Palestine with funding from the college. He's just such a good speaker and can convince you so well that he convinced everyone in the school this was a good idea. Took people back to Palestine, not only to do shared learning with adults and youth alike in Palestine where he was from, the village where he grew up, but also they started the first children's library in all of Palestine. This has just happened this last summer. So you would say that is clearly, those are tangible results that need to occur, right? I would say that there might be other organizations on campus that in terms of their political analysis and their overall outlook that might include BDS would not be entirely in line with an organization like his. And I think that that's one of the struggles that we have to get over. And that's something that we have to really talk about is if you are really focused on, I'd class that with an alternative institution, that they're doing really, really empowering work for the people on the ground in Palestine that's necessary, right? And we would hope that their political vision would be just as good. And if it's not, if we think it's not, or if it needs to be discussed whether it is or not, that discussion needs to occur. And that needs to be a constant dialogue between the politically focused and analysis-focused organizations and the ones that are actually doing the work on the ground.
So we got him first, and then we'll go to you.
If I can just do a real quick plug, I got something on the subject of Palestine going around. If you all can just keep that going around, so that's coming up. I think it's right there.
Okay.
So you've done your organizing primarily in the food service industry?
No, actually, I've been in the food service industry for like my work,
Yeah.
but I consciously didn't organize it because I didn't want to shit where I sit, I guess you could say, and so but I've in the last year been organizing, but so my other labor organizing was mostly in it was food industry, it's like warehouse workers, food plants, but I do have experience in that.
Okay. Yeah, I've organized in food service, but not anywhere else. How do you see it as, or do you see it as different from organizing within other industries, and what challenges, I guess, do you see in it that are different from other organizing fields? Just things like front of house versus back of house.
Yeah.
There's not normally as much of a connection between those workers. And also just the nature of the employment is it's normally short term.
The group I work with, we actually have done a lot of studies on the restaurant industry. Now, if you're interested,
Just a little more about it.
our group is Restaurant Materials New York, so it's like rocny.org, and the national one is rocunited.org. And we've done some studies, and our studies actually show that, contrary a lot to the popular beliefs about the restaurant industry, most of the jobs are not as short-term as people think they are. There are lifelong people in the kitchen, lifelong people. It's mostly in the back of the house where there's longer-term jobs. And also, it's one thing, if people want to say, like, these immigrants are ruining our labor movement and the things. If you talk to any organizers, it's not the back of the house Mexican workers that are the lemons. It's the front of the house white people. So that's another kind of fallacy with a lot of things. But it's different than other industries because there is more transient nature. There is a division, but there's divisions in all workplaces. So I don't buy the argument for a lot of people that it's as different and as difficult. I think it does warrant a different type of organizing and that hasn't been figured out yet. There used to be, for example, waitress unions back in the 1900s up until like the 1950s and 60s were the heyday. Well, 40s and 50s were the heyday. And it was kind of how if you were in a trade, like a carpenter union, your benefits followed you from restaurant to restaurant. You had like a hiring hall, and you were in the union. And granted, there was some, they excluded a lot of black women. There's problems to it, but it was a little bit different. And I think we have to maybe go back to study the history of that again and come up with maybe more dynamic forms of unionism to accommodate that. But in general, we have to go and try and do it. No unions organizing restaurants right now. Like, I don't work for a union, it's a worker center, it's different. We don't have the right to collective bargaining. But the reason why we exist is because unions won't organize restaurants. So one, I think unions have to get off their asses and organize restaurants. You have to go and do it, and I think we can do it, and just be a little more creative in how we do it. But concretely, it's not too much different.